Today, we're diving into a single Supreme Court case that asked a really important question. What happens when justice is 1,000 kilometers away? This is the story of Jyoti Singh versus Yogendra Singh, and it's all about how one person's struggle forced a huge shift in family law, putting real-world problems ahead of just, rigid legal rules.
I mean, just think about it for a second. You're a single parent, and all of a sudden, you have to go fight a court case in a city you've never even been to, hundreds and hundreds of miles from home. How would you even begin to handle the travel, the money, the logistics of it all? Well, that was the exact situation at the very heart of this case. So, to get our bearings, here's a quick timeline. The couple got married back in 2008, had a daughter the next year, but by 2012, things had fallen apart and they separated. And what started as a personal issue would eventually become this huge legal fight that went all the way to the Supreme Court by 2016. All right, so let's get into our first section, this cross-country battle. And really, this wasn't just a simple disagreement. It turned into a complete logistical nightmare that stretched across 2 different states, putting a ton of pressure on one side of this fight.
So here's what was happening on one side of the story. You have Jyoti Singh living in Hyderabad. The court records say she'd left her husband's home because of alleged mistreatment, and now she was the main person taking care of their little girl. Her entire life was basically centered in that city.
But at the very same time, her husband, Yogendra Singh, decided to file for divorce. The catch? He didn't file the case in Hyderabad where she was. Nope, he filed it where he lived, in Jabalpur, which instantly created this massive geographical problem for Jyoti.
And that brings us to Section 2, the 2 sides of the story. Because, like any legal fight, right, there were 2 totally different arguments about where this case should actually be heard. And you kind of have to understand both to see why the Supreme Court eventually had to get involved.
This slide really breaks it all down. On Jyoti's side, her argument was pretty straightforward. Traveling was a huge hardship. She had to care for her daughter, she was worried about her safety in a new city, and she was struggling financially. But on Yogendra's side, his argument was all about procedure. He was like, hey, I filed the case first, my convenience matters too, and moving it would be a major hassle for me. It's this classic legal tug-of-war that the court had to figure out.
So you can see this was basically a stalemate. And that's what brings us to Section 3. The Supreme Court steps in. Because the lower courts couldn't seem to solve this problem, Jyoti Singh decided to take her fight all the way to the top, to the highest court in the entire country.
Now, she was able to do this using a very specific legal move. It's called a transfer petition. It's basically this special request you can make asking the Supreme Court to use its power to pick up a case from one state and move it to another. It's a tool designed for exactly these kinds of impossible situations.
And this really put a fundamental question right in front of the judges. Justice isn't just about what the law says on paper. It's about whether people can actually get to the courthouse to have their case heard. So how do you balance what's convenient for both people while still being, fair?
And this brings us to the moment everyone was waiting for, Section 4, the court's landmark decision. This wasn't just a verdict for one couple. Oh no, this was a decision that would end up setting a powerful new rule for thousands of cases that came after it.
The court's thinking really boiled down to 2 big ideas. First, this idea that everyone should have access to justice. It's a constitutional thing. And second, a really practical goal. Let's not have a bunch of different lawsuits about the same family drama happening in different cities, because that would just be legal chaos.
And this is where we get the big, game-changing line from the judgment. The court laid down a crystal-clear principle, saying that in these kinds of disputes, the wife's convenience has to be given primacy. It has to come first, especially when she's the one taking care of a young child.
And this chart shows you exactly how they were thinking. Look, they got that the husband would have some trouble if the case moved, for sure. But they decided that the wife's burden, as a woman with a child to care for, was way heavier. So this balance of convenience, as they called it, tipped completely in her favor.
So, with that logic, the court issued a super clear 3-part order. First, bam, the divorce case was moved to Hyderabad. Second, they said, let's consolidate everything. All the related cases should be heard by the same judge to keep things consistent. And third, they told the court in Hyderabad to get a move on and handle the case quickly to avoid any more delays. So, the case is resolved for Jyoti and Yogendra. But why are we still talking about it years later? Well, that's what this last section is all about. Why this case really, truly matters. Its impact goes way beyond just 2 people.
This wasn't just a win. It was a huge moment for family law in India.
This one single judgment created a clear, guiding principle that courts all over the country could look to when they face similar situations. It was a game changer.
I mean, the legacy of this thing is massive. It really hammered home the idea that the wife's convenience comes first in these transfer cases. It also set a strong precedent for combining cases, which just makes the whole system work better. And maybe the most important thing? It was the highest court in the land finally saying, out loud, that they recognize the very real practical difficulties that women often face, challenges that before might have just been brushed off as a simple inconvenience.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. The story of Jyoti Singh is this powerful reminder that justice isn't some abstract idea in a textbook. It has to actually work for real people in their messy, complicated lives. It forces all of us to keep asking, are our laws designed not just to be fair on paper, but to be fundamentally practical for the people who need them the most?